Good afternoon, my beautiful soul followers. I'm so excited to have you guys here today. So, the other day I put up a question on my main profile, and it was about what is love bombing and how do we know the difference between love bombing and I termed it normal, which is just a setting on a freaking dryer, but a normal kind of love relationship. And I was astounded at the amount of comments and people's viewpoints. And I had a reason, because I've been hearing this word over and over and over again recently. And as I'm hearing it, it is definitely triggering different emotions in me as I see people using this over and over again. And you might go, well, why, Addison? Why is this triggering emotions in you? And it's because I spent years as a therapist actually working with people that, although it was not my specific niche, as a therapist, I worked with people that had real personality disorders. And love bombing comes from narcissism. When we talk about love bombing, a lot of times, most of the time, we're talking about it in terms of narcissism, which is an actual personality disorder. Narcissistic personality disorder is a real condition. It's a real thing that people struggle with. But guess what? Only 0.5 to 1% of the United States population actually has narcissistic personality disorder. If you want to say throughout the last few years, with everything that's gone on, we've become more selfish, and maybe that's grown a little bit, and I don't have the stats for this, but at what, maybe 2%? And I was looking through TikTok the other day. Actually, I was going to make some of my funny videos that I've been trying to do on Fridays just to lighten the mood. And I can tell you that maybe out of 20 videos, probably about 7 or 8 of them were on narcissism. And this love bombing term kept coming up over and over and over again. And so I did take some notes, which usually, if you watch me, if you follow me, I like to kind of just flow. However, I find that it's important to get you guys this information and to really break it down to a certain degree. So there was a couple people who were like, what the heck is love bombing? And I said, I've not even heard of it. And it is truthfully actually something we have, a terminology we have really developed over the last decade. Okay, it is definitely a term that we've created, and it's become a zeitgeist. And what love bombing is we, in the beginning of a relationship, somebody throws all this love on you, lots of compliments, like flowers and compliments, and tells you how amazing you are. Basically, it is taking somebody and almost immediately putting them on a pedestal and throwing all this energetic love and gifts. And look at the love languages: gifts, acts of service, words of affirmation, all of those things at someone really quite quickly. It is a quick kind of movement. And sometimes in love bombing, you see what ends up happening is you'll see it throughout a relationship. If the relationship lasts, there'll be periods of this. However, between those periods, there is no compliments, no love being given. It's almost a retraction of love. It is said to be a very manipulative act of, like, I'm going to take my love back. You can't have my love. I did this for you and that for you. And a lot of times it becomes something that is used against the other partner. And so there is this retraction of love, and it becomes this only occasional giving. And most of the time, it declines throughout the fullness of the relationship. If it's, a 10-year relationship, it lasts maybe a year, and then all of a sudden it starts going down. And the other person is always thinking about those moments when they were getting all this love, they were being cared for, and the other person, the love bomber per se, will throw that in that other person's face. The problem, and I have a very unpopular opinion about love bombing, a lot of times when we tell somebody they're love bombing us, or we look at a partner and go, you just are love bombing me, it's a lot of bullshit. It's a lot of fucking bullshit. Okay, so, and you might go, how can you say that, Addison? Like, you said it's a real thing, and you say you've worked with narcissism. And I think it's a load of bullshit a lot of times because we're not willing to look deeper. We're not willing to look deeper into the actions and why this pattern is happening in a relationship. And it's not necessarily the other person love bombing us as much as a miscommunication or a misperception in our love and how we're exchanging, because most people are not going through their lives love bombing per se. Because love bombing oftentimes comes with a negative intent and a manipulative kind of intent with it. There's a manipulative piece. It's I'm going to use this so I can gain control over another human being. And oftentimes that is not the intent of most people. The average person is not going out there love bombing somebody on purpose. Now, is there unhealthy behaviors we can have in a relationship? Most certainly. And yes, there are people who are love bombers and are narcissists, but I think this is a big, big thing and label to throw on another human being. So let's dive into this a little bit deeper. Oftentimes, people who have learned to be trauma bonded as they're growing up will develop some of these same patterns, and it's not from a space of manipulation. It's a space, and in truth, it can come across as manipulative, but a lot of times it is just a way for that other human to feel safe within. And also, a lot of times we put people on pedestals. Well, guess what? At some point, that person will fall. So it might not be a manipulative tactic of the other person. It could simply be a trauma bond. This is actually something like growing up, I very much had some of these same trauma bonds, and I had to really learn to work through them. And, sometimes I still see it come through of like over giving or over loving on somebody. And you have to really look within and go, okay, is this coming from a space of insecurity? Is this coming from a space of I'm just sharing all this love with another human? I'm really just a person who has all this love and all this gratitude, and I'm really just trying to share? Or am I trying to secure a relationship? And so for somebody who has been told they're love bombing, that is something to really look into. Are you trying to soothe your insecurities? Are you trying to overboost somebody up? Are you putting somebody on a pedestal? So these are oftentimes things that get confused for love bombing. Is it healthy? No. Trauma bonding isn't a healthy thing. At some point in that person's life, most likely as a child, it was a healthy thing. If that person has been in an abusive relationship, guess what? They've had to learn to love bomb because that abusive person was most likely, why aren't you loving? Like, there is this trauma reaction that can happen and build in us. But to then look at somebody, and again, this is oftentimes seen, it's labeled as a narcissistic behavior, but a lot of times it's just an unhealthy behavior. Okay, it's a learned behavior. Versus in narcissism, it is a true negative intent, manipulative kind of action. And that's why we can get in a ton of danger when we start to use these terms and we put this stuff on somebody, because then we are then shaming them, or we're shaming them for loving. Also, we cannot measure someone else's intent. And I saw a lot of people in the comments of this go, well, it's in the intent, and you just know someone's intent, and that's a load of fucking bullshit. You do not know someone else's intent. When we think we know someone else's, what other people's intent is, when we start to play that game, we start to play into mind reading. And guess what? We're not mind readers, even if you're psychic. Guess what? That is a dangerous, dangerous game to play. I know that person's intent. I know that other person's intent. I know they're being manipulative. We get into a dangerous game when we start to judge someone else's intent, because we don't know what's going on in that other human. Now, if that person's like, well, there are ways, there's patterns, and I'll get to that in a second, that we can kind of, sift this out a little bit. But we cannot tell someone else's intent. And so if you're looking at someone and going, they're just loving me to be manipulative, or they have a negative intent, or they're trying to control me with their love, it is dangerous to kind of get into someone else's head, unless they're verbalizing that to you and going, well, now you need to do this for me, or you owe me. Well, then that's a communication of intent right there. Okay. And then the other thing is, I saw there was another comment, and there was a couple comments about this, and one of the things is that in love bombing, it starts to decline, right? Well, another thing that tends to decline is our effort in relationship. A lot of people will decline their effort as a relationship goes on. And then if one person starts out and they have this big open heart, and they're giving and they're loving and they're like really boosting somebody up, and then all of a sudden they're not receiving anything in return, then it is actually healthy for them to start to pull back, because while we should not have an expectation of always receiving things from our love, if you are always giving and you're never in the receiving, no one is, that other partner, when it comes to couples, is not giving back, then it's actually healthy to start to pull back. There is a level of healthiness, because then we start to get resentment, things grow. I work with couples all the time, and they will be like, when we first started the relationship, he or she was doing all this stuff for me, and then when I asked the other party, well, why don't you do that for the other person anymore? Usually what comes up is they stopped appreciating me. They stopped giving me energy, because guess what? We can do the actions, but there is a big, big difference between going through the motions of something and giving somebody energy. Okay, I get a lot of times, well, yeah, no, I sat and we watched TV together. We had a moment, but did you snuggle? Did you have a moment? Did you talk? Or yeah, we had sex. So that was love. Like, she wanted sex. No, she probably wanted your presence level. She wanted your attention. She wanted that peace, the energy of love. And so oftentimes if we go, well, they've stopped doing all this stuff for me, so that means they were love bombing me in the beginning. Oftentimes there is something that has created that retraction of love. It could have been something that was said. It could be you're not reciprocating energy, or that person's not being loved in the way they need to be loved, because you might be talking words of affirmation and really they need, physical touch. That is their love language. And so when we go, oh, you're love bombing me, like when we snap somebody clothes like that with just a fucking label, guess what? That's not loving. And that puts a label on them, and that actually makes it where it is much harder for them to get out of that box. You have then put somebody in a box, and once somebody is in a box in your mind, it is very difficult for them to get out. You would have to really do your own work, and this is just a really dangerous label, because it goes so closely with narcissism, which I think is a really dangerous label too, unless you are qualified to be putting a personality disorder on somebody. And I know that that's not an unpopular opinion. I know I'm going to have coaches that are like, guess what? Unless you're qualified to put a personality disorder, which is a very, very serious diagnosis, stop using the term narcissism. We all have narcissistic traits. That's how we get our personality disorders, guys. That's how we get our diagnoses. Is most humans have a piece of all of those things within us. We all have. It just gets to a point of not functional and not healthy to the point that it is dangerous. That's how we get our diagnoses in the psychiatric world. But now, like I said, I go on TikTok and everyone's a narcissist all of a sudden, and I'm like, this is dangerous, because we're closing our minds to our fellow human. We're closing love down, The other thing is, how much love is too much love? And so I ask my clients a lot of times when they're like, they get to a point of being uncomfortable with how that other person is loving, I ask them, have you set up verbal boundaries? If somebody is, if you have somebody who is, doing something that you feel is inappropriate, you feel like it's just makes you uncomfortable, number one, I really suggest you looking in and digging into, hopefully maybe with a coach, myself, somebody who can help you do a little bit more digging. But even by yourself, to really dig into, why am I uncomfortable with this level of love? Why am I uncomfortable from this relationship and this kind of love? Really looking into your belief systems below that. Because maybe and I don't want to say you're the issue, but you're the issue. It might be that you're struggling to receive love in a certain way, and that other person has a different viewpoint on that love. And so maybe you don't want your friends sitting and snuggling with you, and you're like, that's kind of inappropriate. I don't want that. Well, have you set up, verbal boundaries to that, and maybe talk to that other person, then go, well, I see it as platonic. I don't see it as a big thing. Well, guess what? That's a beautiful space for one person to be like, oh, okay, maybe that other person wasn't love bombing me. Maybe I just need to get either comfortable with the way they're expressing their love, or set up boundaries. It's a beauty of communication, which we tend to forget. And when we set a label on somebody like love bombing and this manipulative intent, what ends up happening is we shut down that communication. We shut down the ability to hear somebody else and take in their perspective and take in their perception on this. And then another thing is, somebody said, love bombing is self-serving, and healthy love is not self-serving, and that's a load of bull. It's a load of bull. There is a level of when we're talking, I could go very spiritual with this, but I am really talking about, this world relationships, and we all have egos, and at some level, all love is self-serving. When I love on somebody, I'm also receiving in return. I am receiving energetically for giving. I am receiving at some level. We don't do things that we don't get from, okay? So when we're loving on somebody, it is self-serving as well. We receive. And many times we actually receive more when we're giving love than even the other person a lot of times. And so if we go into it is actually a very Kabbalistic, spiritual perspective, when you give, it's like, what is your intention in the giving? And again, we're back to intention, and you cannot read someone else's mind. And so in this, all love at some level is self-serving. And it's like, is it self-serving in terms of a negative intent? Or is it self-serving in the way of I want the gift of giving love. I want to feel that gift. Well, guess what that is? I want to give to this other person because I care about them. You will receive in that. You receive. Now, if you're giving just out of a obligation, if you're giving in order to get something, from that other person, oh, well, I gave you a back rub, so now you must give me a 30-minute back rub. Guess what? That's not a gift. That's commerce right there. That is complete commerce. But we do, if somebody is always giving, yes, there is a self-serving of wanting to also receive. That is a healthy relationship, that there is this orgasmic flow between the two people or three people or however many people. There is a beautiful flow of love and energy. And that's when truly you can feel that flow of love. But oftentimes in relationships, we get lazy. We stop appreciating people. And so really my message today is not that love bombing's not a thing, because it is. and I've seen it, and I've experienced it. I think we all can sometimes fall into behaviors that are very characteristic of this. But before I think at the end of the day, it's to really think deeper. Think deeper into the people you're communing with at any level, your friends, your family, your lover, to really think deeper into that relationship, to communicate, to get verbal, to ask questions, to go, why do you do that? Why do you do that? And to, even if you're feeling like either uncomfortable with the way someone's loving you, to have that conversation and to really set up boundaries and go, when you bring me flowers every time you come over, like, that makes me uncomfortable. That makes me uncomfortable. And, so I'd like to set up a boundary. That is totally appropriate. Totally appropriate. So having that communication, and then also looking within and going, why am I uncomfortable with this type of love or that type of love, or somebody like propping me up so much. So it's to just look at how you're loving, and potentially maybe you're dealing with someone, you're actually most likely dealing with somebody who has some form of trauma. Guess what? We all have trauma. We don't get to adulthood without some form of trauma. And so maybe you're dealing with someone that has had serious trauma, has had trauma bonding situations, who has had abuse situations. And so digging deeper into looking at that, and not that you can't point out a behavior, because it's not that these things are healthy, always healthy, but instead of shaming someone with a label that is very, very negative, to just have those conversations and begin to work through it if you really care about that other person. So, yes, Leon, those uncomfortable communications create understanding. Yes, yes, yes. So, before you throw a label of love bombing, and especially before you throw a label of narcissism on somebody, really think, and really communicate. And look at potentially where your blocks are in that. Because I can say the average human, the average person, and I know average is a flippant kind of word, but most people are not out to cause harm, to cause negative, and most people don't go into relationships with a negative intent to like screw someone over or to gain control. Like, that is not the average person. The average person does want to love. They want to be loved. They want to give love. So look truly a little bit deeper before we start throwing negative labels on our fellow man. And then if you really are dealing with somebody who you think is narcissistic, has these traits, or is truly love bombing you, and it's making you uncomfortable, then do reach out for help. Do find somebody that is qualified and has worked with people with this, because guess what? You're going to need help as much as that other person also is going to need help, because that creates a toxic environment. So, all right, guys, I think you got my perspective. I would love to hear your comments, your perception, what you think, where you've seen this in your own life. And as always, if you want to work with me, if you want to dive deeper, if you're struggling with this yourself, or if you have a partner that's struggling with this, or just a friend or family member, then you can reach out to me. We can do a pleasure planning chat and talk about how I can guide you on this process, on this beautiful journey. So I hope you guys have an amazing rest of your day. Sending you all love, light, and blessings, and I'll see you soon for another Addison Unleashed. Bye, guys.